Good afternoon to everyone I didn't have the chance to greet before. My name is Maria Ruda. I'm the chair of the Black and Asian Minority Ethnic Network, and it's a huge pleasure to be here with you this afternoon to learn from two fantastic academics, and they happen to be fellow Brazilians as well, that are going to bring an underappreciated take on race and science, race and academia. We've got some housekeeping, oops, went too fast. So some housekeeping announcements. I've seen that, everybody's showing their best behavior, muting the microphones and disabling the cameras. Please use the chat window to ask questions. So if you don't know where the chat window is, so you probably have an interface similar with this one, but here's my face, there is the presentation. So here on the top, it's the second button, that is the chat symbol. And please feel free to tweet about the event. The University of Nottingham's theme for these years, Black History Month, is extremely defiant. It's Black joy, Black joy in face of all the adversities we are going through. And if possible, please also tag our network Twitter handle, UON BAME. So I'm going to start introducing our guests, both of them with very impressive CVs, trajectories. First, I will introduce you to Professor Carla Figueira de Morrison Faria. She completed her BSc and MSci in physics at the University of Sao Paulo. For people that don't know the University of Sao Paulo, it's one of the most prominent universities worldwide, the best one in Latin America. Then she earned her PhD at the Max Born Institute on strong field and attosecond physics. Then she became a postdoctoral researcher at the Max Planck Institute for Physics of Complex Systems in Dresden, the MBI Berlin, the Technical University of Vienna, and the University of Hanover. In 2005, she moved to the UK as a university research fellow at the Department of Mathematics, City University of London, where she became a lecturer in 2006. Then she took a lectureship at UCL, the famous Department of Physics and Astronomy, where she initiated and leads a research group. In 2013, she was promoted to reader, in 2018 to professor of physics. Beyond strong field physics, she has also worked on non-Hermitian Hamiltonian systems and short pulse propagation. She also actively promotes women and minorities and the intersection thereof in science. Our second guest today is Dr. Katucha Bento. Dr. Katucha Bento is a lecturer in Race and Decolonial Studies at the University of Edinburgh, with national and international experience working from an intersectional approach on racialization, politics, and race. Multiple constructions of gender, formations of nationality, migration, Black diaspora, and affective economy. Katucha's background is rooted in the Black movement in Brazil, samba community, and quilombo territory. And I'm sure that she's going to explain much more about that during her presentation. Her areas of interest are Black feminisms, decoloniality, critical race studies, queer studies, critical rhetorical analysis, and anti-racist pedagogies in education. Katucha earned her PhD in Sociology and Social Policy from the University of Leeds. Her MA is in Sociological Research from the University of Barcelona in Catalonia, and BA in Sociology and Politics from the Foundation School of Sociology and Politics in Sao Paulo. So there we've got here two people that were one was born as well, Katucha, in Katucha's case, but both were um, trained, you know, among the very best in Brazil. So I will with these introductions I'll be very grateful if Katucha could take the floor and talk us through her reflections of these other perspectives on race and science. Thank you very much, Katucha.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for this invitation. Before I start my presentation, I wanted to say thank you, Maria, for this beautiful presentation. And I need to say that we know each other for a few years now, maybe. And it is a pleasure to be here in this floor, sharing this floor with you to discuss in more depth the topics that are so important to us, not only as Black women migrants from the African diaspora, but also as people who want to promote some change and who understand the change that is necessary from inside out, inside our workplace, inside ourselves. So it is a pleasure to be here with you. And I also wanted to be thankful to this conversation, to everyone who is joining in, who is present to listen, to exchange some ideas, and for the University of Nottingham to open this discussion, because being interested in how to debate the other anti-racist movements, pedagogies that we can form in our own environments is very important at this present moment. So it was always, but I think this is a pressing topic that we always have to be more dedicated in learn how to grow. And here I am also to do that, to learn a little bit more with you and the questions that are going to follow our presentations. So without further ado, I'm just going to share my screen with you. I have two screens, so I hope everything will be fine. Just bear with me a moment. Yes, you just let me know if you cannot see my screen right now, something is wrong. So, oops, we are here. So today I'm going to talk about the Black Other, and the topic of this conversation is unappreciated narratives on race and science. I will be talking, I hope briefly, I won't discuss so much the Brazilian environment, apart from my last slide, but I will give a more general theoretical approach about how we came to discuss the Black under the umbrella of otherness, and more than that, under the legacies of coloniality. And I'm not able to discuss race without talking about colonial legacies and how we call it racialization politics, how the differentiation categories that existed before coloniality, as we know nowadays, came to be in a shape that is hierarchical and dehumanizing to what we call the other. So I'm sorry, I am seeing two slides different. So the coloniality of being, the coloniality of power, the coloniality of truth, or the coloniality of freedom are concepts that many authors are using nowadays, such as Sylvia Wynter, Mignolo, Dussel, Grossvogel. But more than giving you the authors or the references, I think it's more interesting to understand how this is creating or shaping the conversation, because this is what I wanted to do here, to talk about the colonial legacies, about the creation of race. And in this understanding of being human or being dehumanized or being inhuman, creates the notion of power. Who holds the power of life? Who decides who gets to live, who gets to die? And this entire understanding of humanity, this is the entire understanding of who gets to live, is also embedded in the consequence or hand to hand with the understanding of who holds the truth. So the narratives of racialized experiences, or the epistemological approaches, the wisdom, the knowledge about the nature, about new medicines, and how we can create our different architectures or different structures of civilizations, were erased from the knowledge that we learned at school or we learned in the university. We're still learning a very Eurocentric approach of truth in the university. So this is part of our colonial legacies, that is what Ramon Grossvogel calls the epistemicide, erasing the knowledge of the other, of the inferiorized, or even borrowing that knowledge and making it European. That's why, from the Eurocentric perspective, transforming that reality into something that it makes sense in the Eurocentric perspective. Attention, I'm not saying that the Eurocentric is a problem. I am just saying that it is a problem when it's universalizing the understanding of the truth. We can have an Afrocentric perspective. I can bring to you a Latin American centric perspective about the experiences of slavery, for example. But I am not trying to universalize the experiences of slavery into the entire world. And that's why we find the problem whenever we're talking about Eurocentric perspectives. It's because there was an attempt, or actually a successful project to universalize those experiences and create this line of humanity and inhumanity. And that also gave the consequence of freedom. Who is free? Who gets to say what? It's not only about the notion of slavery, but it's also the notion of being able to express yourself, being able to have your religiosity, your spirituality validated in different contexts. What Sylvia Wynter publishes and talks about is that the modernity as we know nowadays is part of that colonial legacies. So she talks about this coloniality of being, power, truth, and freedom, is structured on racism and ethnicism. I think it's important to say that Sylvia Wynter is talking to us about, first, this concept of modernity. It's the new understanding of the world that we have nowadays, how easy it is, the global and easy way to get to different places, to communicate, and so on. But that wouldn't exist, capitalism wouldn't exist if it wasn't for the structure of racism and ethnicism. She's calling attention to the differences of ethnicities within the categories of differentiation, which is very important for us to see how indigenous people, for example, are treated. It's not only about the race, but also the ethnicity that is part of these structures, the social structures that create modernity. And this division of humanity, this division of difference, are based on a power matrix that define what I just mentioned, capitalism, and they help us to understand the world as we have nowadays, the world that we understand nowadays. She is calling attention to the important time frame when these discussions were put in a very radical and very critical perspective in the 60s and the 50s and the 60s, from the anti-colonial, the decolonial, and the liberation movements. Here I'm calling attention to the difference of perspectives. It's not all the literature from the 50s and the 60s that we call nowadays as decolonial, like Frantz Fanon, that they were decolonial then. They understood themselves as anti-colonial, and I think it's important just to situate that as the movement, as the important movement of this renegotiation of this conversation that can never stop. We can talk more about the importance of being in this ongoing movement later on. So there is this dynamic development in creating what Fanon called the rest of the earth, even in what some people believe that there are post-colonial settings, because it's what Fanon and many other authors are trying to call attention to is that we feel that we're not living in a colonial time. We feel that there is no colonial rules ruling that piece of land. Most of the countries are already liberated in, I say most of the countries because I'm not going to talk about Palestine today, but we are going to be talking about the challenging narrative of what is this post-colonial, what is this post-racial that people insist in talking about, and what is this? So she says, even in these post-colonial settings, the rest of the earth are still being produced. The notion and the feeling of slavery is still being experienced. And in her narrative, the Black population group come to be placed at the bottoms of this hierarchy, generating non-white and non-Black groups. Here, it's not to make binaries, okay? It's not to divide Black and white, but it's just to situate that there are more complexities. And I think Carla is going to help us to explore a little bit more of what is in between this Black and white, what is beyond this binary, because it's more complicated, it's more complex than just this bipolar conversation. And then there is this global design. The rules are Christian, are male, are white, to define the rise of the West, but not only to design the rise of the West as a concept, not as a geographical location. We call Australia, for example, as part of the West, although it's not really situated in the globe as the West. And this is the negotiation also with science, which science is using to make this conversation happen. So this is just about the colonial legacy of how racialization politics came to be. I planned this conversation to be about in 15 minutes, but I know that I already took 15 minutes. So I'm just gonna pass through the slides just to go to the core of this conversation. Sylvia Winder is talking about one of the major empirical effects of which would be the rise of Europe and its constitution of the world civilization on the one hand, and on the other, African enslavement, Latin American conquest, and Asian subjugation. She's just drawing the line between the line of human and inhuman, but again, calling attention to the complexity of this topic. The notion of other or othering is in a chapter of this amazing book called Representation. In this book, Stuart Hall has this chapter called The Spectacle of the Other, and he's talking about many ways to categorize the Black as the other, as the inferior, but not only inferior, because it's a iconography of the hypersexualized, of the working class, of the person who doesn't think well, who doesn't understand things well. And he's challenging these aspects, these categories, using the understanding of difference and the other. And not, again, not as binaries, but complicated aspects of how we tend to choose between these levels of analysis to understand what is the inferior or the inferiorized. And he classifies as linguistic, social, cultural, and psych levels of differentiation, not only because difference can be seen in different disciplines, analyzed with different categories and with a very significant role, but difference is also a language of culture, and it has many meanings. But in terms of the positive meaning, it can bring this understanding of culture, of language. But on the negative aspect, it brings the splitting, the hostility, the aggression towards the other, and we need to address to the danger of difference when we are talking and we are discriminating these concepts. So othering is embedded in the matrix of power. So when we establish difference, it's not just to categorize language, culture, and these positive aspects, but it's also coming with the hierarchical matrix that was part of the colonial legacy. We can go through this specific part later on if you want, but I couldn't talk about racializing and creating the other or the Black other without talking about Charles Mills. Charles Mills talks about, he published a book called The Racial Contract, which is also another amazing reference if you want to discuss that in the classroom or even for yourselves. He is saying that there was never such a thing as creating a society so everyone could be equal. He says that there was always a racial contract. And that's why whenever we are talking about the Black other, we are also talking about the anti-Black racism. We're not talking about just racism. In this racial contract, Charles Mills is going to be challenging the contractarian theories in philosophy in a very broad way, but he's talking about the racial contract because there was never something that everyone would be allocated in the contract as an equal role. Everyone would have a difference of class, but the core aspect of this difference would be the racial aspect. So this is a contract based on race, where racialized people as non-white would be always in this bottom of the hierarchy, similar to what Sylvia Winter was talking about, as I presented in the beginning of this presentation. And what is important to see here is that the configuration of racism created a very interesting aspect in this matrix of power, in which the anti-Black racism had a specific point in how racialization happened. The racialization of jobs, for example. Sylvia Winter is trying to unpack this in a very intersectional way. It's not only about the phenotypical aspect of this, by how she calls biocentric constructions of differentiation, but it was the class, it was the jobless, it was the criminalization of Black people. And that's why we have a movement called Black Lives Matter. And that's why whenever I present myself, I need to say that all my epistemological work comes from the Black movement, because it was marginalized to the point of not having an inclusion in the conversation of racism, and an inclusion in the curriculum where I studied, where many of the Black sociologists who made history in the sociological production in Brazil were not in the curriculum where I studied. And it was the first university of sociology in Latin America. So I'm just talking about this understanding of anti-Blackness and the Black associated with the underdeveloped or the one who doesn't think well, who doesn't develop epistemological work in a validated way. And it is part of this so-called minority or the third world. And this minority is another term that has been challenged so much, especially, well, for the past 20 years, but now when we are talking about BAME, instead of talking about BAME, why are we still using those terms? Why are we still using minorities? Considering that we are the global majority, and considering that we are not just a bunch of words together, we have to address to Islamophobia, we have to address to anti-Black racism in a very particular way, because these experiences are different and they need to be addressed in different ways. And finally, I just wanted to close this talk talking about the hip hop in Brazil, where we have contrasting narratives of where is the place of the Black people. In this scene, we have a painting called The Dinner by Charles Motte, and it is a white couple eating, and the black servants are around, and she's feeding the child as an animal. As there are many aspects of this picture that we could develop further. If you want, we can go back. But I just wanted to say that this sold the idea of the racial democracy in Brazil, as if we are living peacefully in our differences, in our different races. And that's not quite true. It is so not true, because, and that's why I bring to the conversation Charles Mills to talk about the racial contract. We never had the invitation or the option to sit on that table. I'm talking metaphorically as well, part of democracy, being part of the representatives who would represent the people, who are more than half of the population in Brazil. And we do not have politicians to represent this more than half of the population, without even mentioning the indigenous and so on. So as a contrast of this harmonic scene in everyday life in the colonial era in Brazil, we have hip hop talking about the systemic criminalization of Black people and this necropolitics that is part of our everyday lives. Because I'm including myself as part of a group who is in constant mourning for their own people, speaking of Marielle, for example. So in this presentation, I'm sorry, it just moved. I don't know what happened. They talk about Dad. He was found in a strange place due to the size of the hole. I got a response. So there was a hole in his back, which was part of the police violence, especially in the favelas or in marginalized areas in Brazil. Buckshot, probably a roll in his back. Perhaps for you, what I say, there is no value, but I will feel this pain on my skin. That's how we call it. The melanin is very heavy for us, Black people. My comrade was on the wrong side, and he was shot with heavy gauge and heavy gunpowder. Bent handle, saw barrel, used cruelly during his death. I was his age. And in this part, and how the police sometimes stages even the gun that is used to kill people in the favelas, in the marginalized spaces. His scream was silenced by a stronger one. His cry for freedom was erased. That was a bad translation. His cry for freedom was erased. And it has been systematically erased, as I presented before, regarding the the erasure of episteme, erasure of voices, expressions, and so on. So just to close, to talk about the differences between what divides us, the difference between difference and othering. Audre Lorde says, "It is not our difference that divides us, it is our inability to recognize, accept, and celebrate those differences." This is a radical reference that is not trying to romanticize the difficult conversations that we need to have about racism, about anti-Black racism in our everyday lives. And as I promised myself not to end any conversation with a bad or a negative tone, I think this radical call by Audre Lorde is inviting us to have a radical understanding of the need to change, to talk about liberation from the colonial legacies. And this will have it will require more action in how we are willing to have these conversations, how we are willing to transform the everyday lives that we are so accustomed to have. So Angela Davis, you have to act as if it was possible to radically transform the world, and you have to do it all the time. And my question to you is, what are you doing? How are you bringing these conversations into your living room, into your classroom, into your pedagogical strategies, in your hiring strategies, in your working environment, in the pub, and in the informal conversations with everyone? So I'm sorry to go over the time. I think it was 23 minutes, but I'm not sure if my clock is okay.
It's absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much, Katucha. Please don't apologize. Thank you.
I will stop sharing my slides.
Okay.
And I hope you managed to listen.
It was perfect. It was perfect, and I'm sure that there will be many questions in a second.
Okay.
And now I'm going to, let me show my face here just for a little bit. Thank you very much once again, Katucha. Absolutely brilliant. So much food for thought. And now I'm going to call Professor Calafaria. And in the meantime, while she, Carla, can you hear me? You're probably
Yes, I can
mute.
hear you.
Oh,
Hear
you,
you.
amazing.
Yes, I just have too little control about this platform because I normally don't use it. So I don't know if anybody can see me or not, or what the situation is.
We can see you perfectly and beautifully, and hear you as well. I'm going to upload your presentation,
Thank you.
and so please bear with me.
Hello, everybody. And also, I would like to thank Maria for this invitation. I really hope I'll be able to help. Sorry. And in my talk, I mean, I'm no expert on race. I'm no sociologist. In fact, I'm a theoretical physicist. But I've been around, I've traveled a lot, and I would like to discuss something that illustrates to you that context is everything. And the subtitle that you have now, if we move the animation, you see that I'm using a racial slur, which I absolutely hate, but that I think is appropriate in this context, because I'm going to talk about my world of adventures a little bit, okay? But I am aware that I have quite a light skin. But I have African features. So in Brazil, sometimes when there's resentment, and especially towards people on the privileged side of colorism, the word Afro-beige is used. I absolutely hate it, but I'm prepared to own it because I think there's truth in it. So first, to give you an idea about my research, I'm not going to talk a lot about it, but I work with some of the fastest timescales in nature and some of the strongest fields. So these are the next, how do I move the next 2 slides? So
just say next slide, please.
Yes, can I say, because I cannot move this very nicely. So I can take control. Brilliant. Okay. So my research area deals with very strong fields, very short time scales, and these fields, they are so strong that eventually one may even polarize, vacuum, and create matter out of light. So I study laser matter interaction. And I looked not only at very extreme fields, but extremely short time scales. And these are attoseconds. And I look at how to model phenomena that occur in this regime. And these are my research lines. I'm not going to go into detail, but I'm going to talk about the physicist. So I was born in the Amazon, Belém, Brazil, in the 1970s. Then I studied in Sao Paulo, actually São Carlos, which is a subcampus of the University of Sao Paulo. Did my PhD in Berlin, many postdocs in Germany, long-term fellowships, permanent positions, etc. So I'm an established person and quite successful as well. And this is the place where I came from. You can see this is the delta of the Amazon. Here you can see the market, the old market. So it's a big harbor. So you have a big mixture of people coming from everywhere. There were indigenous people, enslaved Africans, Portuguese, etc., etc. So for me, technically, I'm what you call pardo, which is a Black person of Afro-European phenotype. So you can clearly see that I'm really at the privileged side of colorism, but I have curly hair, African features, etc. So for me, this wasn't a big deal. First, we are 70% of the population in Pará, which is where I come from. Then on top of that, my family is very posh, very traditional, and it is actually interesting to take these things into consideration. There, actually, I'm very close to the top of the racial hierarchy. So that's when you see that whiteness and blackness, they are relative. And my dad has an Afro-European background and my mom has an indigenous background. So I'm quite mixed, in fact, and these are things that there, how can I say, you don't take this much into consideration because where I come from, I'm in fact privileged, and paleness makes me privileged. But here it seems that is a big deal. Just if you look at physics and you start to talk about gender, 11% of the physics professors in the UK are female. And from this minority, which is like heavily minoritized, if you look at the ethnical background, most of these people, most of these women are white, right? So if you consider mixed, or if you consider black, it's like this is all areas. We're talking here about all areas. So this is male, and this is female, 26. I think now the number has increased, and there's me somewhere there. So there are some people who are undercover, and I consider myself to be undercover. But when I came to the UK and I had to look at the boxes I was filling, they didn't make any sense to me. First, I'm not white, so neither English, nor Irish, nor whatever. Then, I don't come from the Caribbean. I'm not Black African and white, most of the times British. Then maybe this one, I'm not Indian, not Pakistani, so this is also gone. Also, if you look at Black, I'm not African, I'm not Caribbean, not Arab or anything like that. So there were these two possibilities. Now, do you notice what is happening? I am not having a conflict. I know very well that my background is from that side Afro-European, from mom's side is indigenous, pretty much. But the boxes that are offered to me don't make any sense. So this is not, as you say, a tragic mulatto crisis. This is to illustrate that everywhere you go, these boxes, they reflect how colonization played. And in Brazil, it played differently. So I decided for this one. I could have gone for this one. So for me, my Portuguese heritage wasn't that important because I don't identify as Portuguese. I'll never identify as Portuguese because they plundered my country for centuries. But if you're born in the Amazon Delta and you have somehow indigenous heritage, this is something non-negotiable for you, because up to the end of the 19th century, we were still speaking indigenous languages more than Portuguese, and we have a very strong culture. So this was, for me, it's like, okay, ended up in mixed order, which is like a BAME, it's like this amorphous mess. But I felt that even Black order was an amorphous mess, because if you look at the African diaspora in Brazil, and if you look at the indigenous population, they have a totally different culture. So I was very unhappy about this form, and I thought, really, maybe we should trash it. And the question that you have to ask is that, as Katucha really nicely said, we are the global majority. Why do we have always to fill the boxes that these people provide to us? And they try really to simplify us, to categorize us. And this is much more convoluted. This is much more complicated. And I wasn't bullied at school because of race. And you can see why, because it's not only the fact that I'm quite pale, but just look at the picture from our school with our physics teacher. I'm here, he's here. Now, how many white people do you see? 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe, right? So it's a question of who is in the majority, but we could also invert how many people with dark skin do you see? And the reply is 0. So it's just to set up the scene and to make it clear that even in a place where white people are the minority, we have very strong racial hierarchies. And this was at a top school. So I was bullied a bit because I was strange. Actually, maybe still am. And I'm glad to the people who raised me. They're really strong women. I don't always agree with their positions, but they were very strong. And it's interesting because if your family is mixed, you are super pale, you are on top of the hierarchy in that local place, you are still bullied sometimes because your hair is considered bad, and my nose was considered Darth Vader's nose. But I want to make the case that this is nothing if you compare to what darker people must endure. really nothing, because I didn't experience poverty. I had top access to education. At least when I was growing up, I wasn't discriminated, etc., etc., etc. So this is a question of growing up on top of racial hierarchy and belonging to a posh family. So even if people complained about these things, you know, in my family, maybe this is kind of let's put things into perspective, because we need to have perspective. And strangeness is a blessing, because I found cool that I looked like Slash, and that my hair was like a scientist hair, because it's like big. And actually, I'm a bit of a nerd, so I really liked Darth Vader. So it wasn't that bad. But what I can say, even with these small things, is that the culprit is the brainwash that we ourselves experience. Because what happened is that I find this picture absolutely horrible. This is a picture which is called Ham's Redemption and compares blackness to a curse. So this was the idea that people had in Brazil that, for instance, here is the really black grandmother. Then this is like a pardo person like me or other people. This is a white dude, and they are like cleaning up the bloodlines. Can you see how horrible this is? And they were bringing European immigrants to whiten the population, while at the same time, Black people who had been freed from slavery, they had absolutely no support, nothing. They were giving absolutely a lot of support to European people. So, like, I joke that one way of seeing this is like you import, they imported grandfathers for us. So actually, I got 2 imported grandfathers like this. And we, pardos, especially if our skin is light, we are taught to reject blackness. And you find a lot of pardos with identity crisis saying that they are white. And the tough part is that pretos, who are the people with dark skin, they were left to die, they were murdered. And where is the wrong tense? Because this happens a lot still in Brazil. So this myth of racial democracy is a fallacy. I have seen even in my own family that darker family members, they are discriminated. And it is very sad. And then, okay, I went to study in Sao Paulo, and in the whole state, really, the makeover is much more European. You have a white majority. So this is my graduation picture, guys. Can you find me in the room? So the question that we have to ask here is, in the one I showed before, how many white people you saw now is how many Black people do you see? You see this person. And this is a whole hall from a top university in a country in which 56% of the population are Black. Can you see how surreal this is? For me, this says a lot about access. And I can say that I have much more access than many other people because I'm in a gray area. But imagine now someone dark. And who also doesn't belong to a posh family. And normally there is a correlation between race and economic background because of the very colonization that we have suffered and access to resources. So I went to Berlin to do my PhD. This is sometime, this is when I came, mid-1990s. I'm here, this is a hashtag, so you can see it looks quite different. One thing that I really liked was that the city was being united, which means that there are lots of spaces to occupy, and these spaces means that hierarchies are not that well established. And I learned not only physics, I learned history. And I realized how important it is for us to learn history. And one thing I haven't seen any other country are what the Germans call Mahnmal, which, if you translate it loosely, these are called national shame monuments. So they're common in Germany, they're not common in the UK. In Brazil, I've never seen any. But what they do is like some kind of way of calling attention to the shames or the shameful elements in their own history. And this is something that is important. It doesn't mean, I see this discussion now about destroying monument A, destroying monument B. No, that is not the issue. The issue is you're not destroying history if you take down a statue of a slave trader. You are revisiting your history and trying to tell it in a way that acknowledges what happened. And I really like the fact if you go to Germany, you go to a museum, you learn about the Nazi period really in details. Really, everything is well documented. They don't sugarcoat it. And but you go around in Berlin, you are not going to find a single statue of a Nazi. And this is amazing. This is really good. Now, we need to learn history because we, in Brazil or even in the UK, from what I can see, we are totally just getting one version, which is biased, which is revisionist, and which is partial. We don't know anything about our own history, and this is absolutely crazy. Now, my timeline looks quite good. So if you looks successful, looks nice, but it wasn't that easy. And I can say, if you look here, you see that racism did play a role, especially once I left a bubble, which was more or less this time, when I was here still in the Amazon. So I transferred my course. I tried to go back to Brazil many times. Bullying was my whole life, but because of race, started 1990. I'm not talking about this pale person here. So, well, my message is, despite that, I'm here. I mean, I'm a professor, I think physics professor, which is a pretty much male-dominated area, so it's a big thing. But what I want to say is that I don't think there is for anybody a rough or a smooth timeline, but you have to take into consideration what you learn on the way. Don't worry too much about pleasing people, because you're never going to be able to please everybody. But if you belong to a minoritized group, especially depending on the hierarchy that you're faced with, be careful with tokenism or cultural taxation, because there's going to be a lot of burden on you. And also be careful of pastoral tasks. In fact, I was the undergraduate admissions tutor at UCL from 2016 to 2019. I had powerful lessons on interpersonal skills, politics, unconscious bias, time management, etc. Now, one thing I was expecting it to be a tough job, because it is very time consuming. One thing that I didn't expect was the extra burden that you have to carry, because the community, the public, and sometimes some of the support staff, of course, not always, they have a very specific idea of how a scientist should look. And this was a big issue. I had an extra layer of dealing with racism and all sorts of things. So sexism as well. And you wouldn't believe how the public is. So actually, this was a big issue. Intersectionality was a big issue. And also, women, you would think is not the case, but unfortunately, some of the worst people I've ever met in my life are women. And what happens is that when you have scarce resources, these people, or you start to fight, and you are convinced by the majority, in this case patriarchy, that you have to fight over these resources, or that to be successful, you have to emulate some of the unhelpful behaviors that these people have. So this is actually, there is a name for this, which is sisterhood ceiling. I'm not an expert in this area, so I was shocked to know that there is a name. And it's very common that women bully other women, especially if you are at a high level. And many times this goes under the radar because the line managers, they are typically male, and they think, this is some kind of woman's fight. And this is sexism, but that's how this problem is many times approached, is viewed as, it's nothing. And women, via unconscious bias, are typically perceived to be more cooperative. And on top of that, if you haven't read this report, stay in power, read, because it's heavy. And these are some of these things that actually happened to me. So I had really, in fact, that's why I got involved in trying to help, because I had some really very heavy bullying problems from white female academics. So here I'm not read as white. And it was unbelievable. And also, you have issues with white women of low status among, for instance, support staff, because they're powerful undercurrents, and they, very deep inside, they are expecting you to serve them and not the other way around. And it's not about someone serving anybody or having lack of respect for them, but they think they shouldn't be supporting you. And it's very, very common that they end up disrespecting you, and you are treated sometimes in really not nice ways. Obviously, not everybody, also not all female academics, but this happens. And the higher you go, the tougher it gets. And I want to look at the bigger picture as well. So, I think we've come a long way. We still have a lot to do. If you think someone like me could never be sold 200 years ago, think again. If you can read Portuguese, you see here parda, light-skinned mulata, or they would kidnap the kids. Sometimes some white relative would kidnap the kids and then sell them in some other states. So it was less likely because it's less obvious, and we still have a very strong proximity to whiteness that we need to acknowledge to dismantle colorism. But these things did happen. And look at the bigger picture, because it used to be much worse, much worse. So this is like the time I started to do my PhD. And last year I read somehow, I was 24, I read that the average lifespan of an enslaved person in a plantation was 24. And the landscape is really has changed, but there's still a lot to be changed. And just to say, we have no time for complacency. This is another big picture which looks like my graduation picture. Actually, I realized later on. They too, they finished their PhDs just right now, so I'm very happy for them. But if you look, what you see is like a sea of white people, but things are changing, and the struggle continues. So thanks a lot for your attention.
Thank you so much, Carla. Such a powerful account of your personal experiences and bringing, a lot of the complexities of race in Brazil. It's not for the faint-hearted, and
No.
I do hope that it brings my apologies, that it highlights the struggle that we go through in other continents, and and the background that we bring to this discussion as well, because I think that it's important as well. And I don't know if Katucha could come back on camera so people can see her as well. Thank you, Katucha. It's to think that Brazil, maybe I should have said that in the introduction, because it's, we know that by heart. Brazil was the last country to abolish slavery in, the slave trade. The slave trade of African lives. It was the last country in the world to abolish it. Um, Brazil has got the largest Black population outside Africa, the second largest Black population in the world. So we are only behind Nigeria. Uh, and as Carla very well said, it's it's a it's a state project. Very How can I say? No, that we was the foundations were the clarifying the population, importing white individuals to breed with existing Black or native Brazilians, and therefore make the population whiter, creating this gradient of inequalities that we see up to this day. Color of skin correlates massively with socioeconomic background. From the three of us, I'm unapologetically Black. I'm a Black person for as far as I can trace in my family tree, with few white intruders and some native Brazilians. But I still, if I, my sister, she did her DNA test, and she's 25% white. So how can you explain that? So that's another complexity that Carla talked very briefly. That is, the systemic rape that happened in all the colonies during the slavery time, and as Katucha so well said, there is a lot of it's the epistemicide and the genocide of Black people, enabled by colonialism and imperialism. So I'm talking too much now. We are open for questions, and as we are among friends here, if you prefer to say your questions instead of writing, please raise your hands. Um, if not, I will start with a question for both of you. And that's connecting to an event we had last week. There is a question here. So fantastic. So Gabriella asks, what is your advice to deal with the fragility defensiveness of white people who perform wokeness, but are unwilling to have open conversations about racism? Can we start with Katucha, please?
Hello, Gabby. Hi. Thank you for this question, because I think it's a very important one. I think that we have to do what we can, because right now, and also as a Black woman, as the only Black woman in the department where I work, I believe that it's important to engage in the conversations as far as our white counterparts are willing to, because it's not always that we can have the emotional labor to teach what is the anti-racist, as long as we are having this conversation. So I'm not sure if the advice is to deal with fragility or defensiveness of white people, as the journalist, I'm sorry, I'm just going to recollect her name. She says, "I'm no longer talking to white people about race anymore," and that's her advice. And she has a very strong and amazing point about it's not about not talking to white people, but it's talking to people who are always defensive and always fragile to assess their own privilege and the ways they reproduce racism. I would say that I agree in, instead of having to deal with that, try to build your own support community and build your own group in where you can rely on and discuss the things that are affecting you somehow. As a Black person, I think having a support group is the key to learn how to deal with white fragility in different spaces. And it's not, we're not talking about only workspaces, but also, you know, the everyday being followed in the in the shopping hallways. That happened to me a few weeks ago when my sister came to visit. So I think this kind of a, yeah, defensiveness when we are discussing, but also the embodied aspect of white privilege is something that is quite challenging, and it's quite diminishing, dehumanizing sometimes. So I would say don't have to, that's not my, I don't write for with people with white fragility in mind. I write for people who are willing to have a conversation about racism. So I wouldn't be able to answer completely this question. I think affect and love are two revolutionary elements for every single aspect in our lives. So before anything, make sure that you are loved, you are safe, before engaging in any white fragility defensive conversations that will charge a lot of your of our emotional labor, our, you know, well-being, most of all.
Thank you very much, Katucha. Carla?
I mean, it's difficult because if people have already white fragility, this means that they are not really prepared to address the issue or face the issue, right? And it's something interesting that I observed when there was this, remember this scandal with Jessica Krug, that she was pretending to be Black and she wasn't. I saw a lot of people who look like me becoming defensive and centering themselves. So it was a way of looking at white fragility being a bit shifted. So if you want, like light skin fragility. And I kind of realized that whatever you told these people wouldn't solve the problem. You, as a white person or as a light skinned person, you have to be willing to engage. If you are not, it's not up to a Black person to try to break this. We have to support ourselves, because this is going to be to talk to deaf ears. And this person is going to invent whatever excuse they can to avoid the conversation. So I don't know, it seems to me like a hopeless task. I mean, I know some people who were bullying me, they would go to one diversity course after the other. And I mean, I asked myself, what are these people learning? So it doesn't mean there is no way and you shouldn't have these courses, but it has to come, the initiative has to come somehow from the privileged individual to admit that there is a fragility there.
Thank you very much, Carla. I couldn't agree with both of you more. I think that there is this expectation that we are going to rise above and try to, to appease people, and actually we don't have time for this.
No,
Do we?
no, we cannot, because it is, you have to take care of your work, and you still have to carry this burden.
No, yeah, we've got enough. We've got enough on our plate. So I couldn't agree more, and I hope that Gabriela feels he feels embraced by our support. Debbie Lee Reed, our lovely BAME Staff Network Manager, she asks, racial stereotyping are oversimplified without regard to individual uniqueness, like you described, and rooted in the white dominant society. How do you, as an individual, challenge or respond to such generalization? What do you think institutions such as universities could do more to enhance the voice of others? Carla? Yeah.
Decolonize.
Both of us, I think we can say something.
No, yeah, I starting with Carla and then Katucha, so we
Okay, I mean, I think a first and key issue is to learn proper history, and especially here in the UK, to look beyond your island, because sometimes you are so obsessed with the UK specific processes that happened here that you don't try to learn other narratives. So what do? You oversimplify the narrative to be able to control it, but you are just bringing one perspective. And I found it quite instructive, for instance, that when I came here, that I looked at these boxes and what do I do with this? And it wasn't, like this tragic mulatto complex. No, it's because there were parts of my identity that were not represented in those boxes. And a lot of people feel this way. So I think a big step is to be more open to other narratives, learn proper history in this country, because nobody does. Also in Brazil, we don't learn proper history unless we are experts, and try to engage with voices which are not the dominant ones. I think this is really important.
And the university institutions, how do you think they can support these, Carla? Do you think they can at all? Do you think it's possible?
I mean, I think it's possible, but people have to be open. And I think now there is some opening. I don't know how long it's going to take. I don't know how much is performative. I don't know how this is going to be addressed. But I think just by having, for instance, this kind of conversation is leading people to think about it.
I'm sure it is the case.
And we need to have more of this.
Thank you so much. Katucha.
Hello. Well, I do support all the movements inside and out academia that are now screaming decolonize, because the notion and the idea, or the project, if we can, I think I prefer that word, is not just to look at the curriculum and put some Du Bois in your reference. Du Bois is a Black author in sociology. He's considered the father of sociology, the modern sociology. Just to put one or two authors of color in your curriculum and say, well, work done. That's not quite what is suggested. So before I talk about the institutional aspect of it, I'm going to talk about how we respond or challenge such generalizations. In a different university where I was working, a student used the term, the N-word, in the essays. And that repeated a few times during the process of marking, okay? So I was outraged because that was the second semester that was happening. And this indicates not a misuse of the term, a racist use of the term by the students, but also what is happening in the classroom. Well, as a person who was marking, I decided that I was going to sign that on the feedback. Why are you using this word? And how is that helpful to investigate or to analyze racism when you are reproducing the same word that people who suffer the racism say don't use it? So that was my attempt to make a constructive feedback. However, one of my line manager came to say, Katucha, as a BAME colleague, I would like to ask you, what should we as a department do? Should we invite the students and talk to them? Should we make a report? And I responded, I am not BAME. And I am not the one who should be telling you how to do anti-racist or how to have anti-sexist or ableist practices in the department. You should have a protocol ready for that. And I'm not going to be here sitting down just to explain to you how to deal with one event. The university needs to be ready to talk about racism in all events. Otherwise, we wouldn't have Black women trying to commit suicide at workplace, in their offices. This is something that is happening in the past 10 years. This happened. So this is something institutional, it's structural, so it's individual, but it's also as affecting our everyday lives. So I just wanted to give this example as someone who used this generalizing label to address to me as a BAME colleague. I am just a Black woman. I'm not the BAME, and I don't represent the BAME, and I don't want that, and I don't really like so much the term. But anyway, what I'm trying to say is that the institutional homework, if we can say, would be to review the curriculum, yes, not because we need people of color, people from the global south talking in the curriculum as validated epistemological or knowledge production that we can understand and share and study, but people with different visions, because we have many authors, many scholars from Brazil with Eurocentric perspectives. So we don't want that. Thank you very much. We don't want that. Second part is we need to understand how our students are engaging with the topic. So we have in the in BARC workshops, BARC is the Building the Anti-Racist Classroom. I suggest to bring to Nottingham. They are very amazing collective. In one of these collectives, we had someone from biology and someone from chemistry talking about how numbers are also racist. So we have the homework to engage in different knowledge epistemologies to see how the students are accommodated, how different voices, how different races, how different people from different geographical places have the understanding of the content that we are trying to teach. The institutions do have the homework. They do have to do this. How they hire. Why do we still have this funnel that Carla showed to us? So in the high school, we have like people of color, but as we go to our postgraduate system, or we get to the point that we are lecturers and professors, we don't see Black faces anymore. We see people doing Black facing, but we don't see literally people racialize as non-white in this position, especially, and I'm talking about anti-Black racism. I'm not talking about the Asian collective, which has a different experience with racism. But in terms of Black people here, it is very difficult to engage in academia. So engaging with hiring is another aspect, and also training. The mandatory training that we have nowadays in the universities are how we can keep safeguard and not to how to put down a fire. But we don't know what to do with if a student says the N word in the classroom. We don't know what to do if we engage with racist or ableist language in the classroom. So this should be a mandatory training about how we deal with this new understandings of differences, which can and is right now developing on so much harm and so many oppressions. So this is what I would say. There is a full agenda about the decolonial thought, talking about how institutions should engage with a more inclusive language, curriculum, staff, and training to everyone, Yeah, well, I'll stop here.
No, thank you. I think one issue as well is even the people in HR, they have difficulties to acknowledge their own biases.
Absolutely.
And you can see this permeates everything because the unconscious bias training that nowadays exists, it's too abstract and it doesn't take anyone outside the comfort zone. And if you really want to change something, you have to take people outside their comfort zone. And the key issue is not only that these things happen, but how the institutions react to what is happening. Say, if you have an instance of racism, how does the institution react? Are we trained enough as an institution to address racism? Now you find a lot of people in leadership positions. They have no idea about history. They didn't even try to do their homework to try to understand historically how this built up and what is going on. They engage with these just to tick some boxes. And some of them still think, okay, science is neutral. Nothing is neutral. So I think the problem starts even with the institutions which are supposed to protect us. Even this term BAME, what does it mean? It goes back to lumping people, right, in a box, which is oversimplifying and is not going to be helpful to anybody because this brings histories together and this brings narratives together which are totally different.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you're mentioning that because I think that in our network we embraced the otherness. So because the otherness exists, it's there, isn't it? So I think that a lot behind, and there was a name change trying to make the otherness that is imposed on us more inclusive. So we went from BME to BAME, but I think that we've been discussing it quite intensely in the last few months, actually. If that's a term that if you should just soldier on. But as you well, both of you very well said, we've got so many, ginormous fishes to fry. that that's the acronym, the nomenclature, with all its fails, it still brings us together. And so yeah, that's something I'll definitely invite both of you when we've got forums to discuss our name and in the near future. So I'm going to say here, so there are some nice messages before I go to Erolinda. That's going to be our last question almost tonight, unfortunately. So our colleague and BAME staff network member Jasmeet Kaler, Professor Jasmeet Kaler said, very well said. Katucha, many thanks for sharing your thoughts. Malu Cursino, that happens to be my daughter. He's here as well, saying thank you very much for this. Amazing. Muito obrigada, Carla e Katucha. She mixed with Portuguese here in the end. Carla e Katucha, not and. Well done, Malu. I'm proud. And then our friend Erolinda Ward says, related to above, how do we get our narratives to become part of normal conversations so that people become more aware? For example, enhance our voice. And then as another example, narratives becoming part of mainstream conversations. So I'm just going to follow up with something that she said after, another that is a complement, as a question that complements this one. Rather than lobbying for access to good education for all, learning history and embracing other non-dominant narratives, what other practical steps can we take to navigate the residual effects of institutional racism? So, Katucha?
So I just wanted to follow up because I think this is a part of a conversation. It's not that all these questions are related to each other. Whenever I'm talking about, the curriculum, the training, the hiring, we are also addressing to the refusal of inclusion. Like, I don't want to be included in a society that is perpetuating colonial legacies. What I want is to change the status quo. So this is what I need to do as I think this is also part of how Black feminism designs its own ideological utopia, because it was because of an ideological utopia that the new world, the colonial idea came to be true. And this entire aspect of what I explained, in terms of hierarchies and power, matrix of power, that racialized in a way that dehumanized so many others. And we don't want to be part of this. So we have the idea that this ideological utopia is to create new futures and new institutions and new ways of living. So for me, these other ways to navigate are already created. They are already part of, the samba communities or the quilombos. Maybe another conversations to talk about quilombos, but maybe the social movements that are happening here. In the UK, we have Racial Justice Network, we have Women's Uncut, we are creating a new NGO to talk about how we are going to create transnational movements of decolonization. In Brazil, on the 20th of November, we are going to launch our free Afrocentric university. So these are other spaces to navigate the need of legitimizing our movements, our attempt to create a new world. This utopia of a free new world is actually something that I believe we have to try to put in practice in different spaces that doesn't rely only in this academic red brick traditional colonial spaces of the university. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Katucha. Carla?
Microphone. First, one point that I would like to make is that already this word inclusion, this or diversity, this already, I look at it in a suspicious way, because it's already implying that you don't want to change the structure too much. You just want to diversify, you want to include some people. It's like you dictate the rules, and then you bring some people from elsewhere just to diversify the whole thing a bit. But what we need is to have structural change. And this is not going to happen if you keep on looking at the situation as if you were doing people a favor. You always see that there are activities in which you want to bring more women, you want to bring more people of color, you want to bring more Black people, but then how do you structure it afterwards so that you allow these people to thrive? And this is not something that you see in the academic environment or in many places. And this needs to change. Or even when you say, we want to bring these people to the table, this is already bad because this implies that the table belongs to you, that you don't want to get rid of that table and construct a new one.
Definitely.
You know, if you say, I want to bring more Black people to the table, I want to bring more women to the table, then the table is yours. You're not changing the table. Okay, let's get rid of this one and build a new one. No. It is as if these people were there as a token or because of an act of charity. I hate this word diversity and equality, or I would really like to see equity. I don't like sometimes how this whole thing is sold, that is like, you know, you exploited the ancestors of Black people, of other people for centuries, and now you say, I'm doing them a favor. Come on. No, really.
Yeah, no, I am with you, and I think that's something that is really, and I would love to discuss with all, all friends, fellow Black and fellow non-white and allies that are present here today, and we've got some and some that I respect deeply. I think that we need something that is really interesting is the creative, because what we want does not exist, as Katusha said. So it's a creative process that will take us to this, to this Shangri-La of of race equality, of understanding, of celebration of differences instead of oppression driven by differences. I'm going to read very, very quickly some things, people here you can see on the chat, and I'm going to say for you. Um, our friends here just really excited. Lamford saying that, putting it very, very in a very straightforward way. I'm an African born in Jamaica, and that's really an impactful uh, statement, and I think that there's a lot for us to think. Before there was my mom, so my mom is here today, and Dr. Katia Maria Cursino de Freitas, and I should say that these are things that are in the back of my mind, but should be really in the forefront. The unified Black movement in Brazil was born in my mom's living room. So it's
Wow.
really, so these you've got her seal of approval. What is something that I'm always, as every child, I'm always looking for. So yeah, thank you for being here from the other side of the pond, Mom. Michael Kyoko says, this has been a great insight for me hearing what has happened and is still happening on the other side of the Atlantic and the common issues we face in Europe, UK. Thanks to the two presenters. And thank you very much, Michael, for joining us today. Evalinda saying no to the speakers, wonderful speakers, absolutely brilliant. Thank you so much. Katusha gave her answer to Lanford here. Many ways to frame racialization, to define the other. Rahila Green, Pearl Agiakwa. I agree with Carla. Sometimes find the talk about diversity and how it enriches our work is a dehumanizing way to talk about us, as though we are value-adding
Totally agree.
commodity. Rahila, yeah, that echoing Pearl's remarks. So we've got a bit of Angela Davis. It's always good. It's always a good meeting when we've got a little bit of Angela Davis just drop
Always.
there, casually. Thank you, Lem, for the Angela Davis said of EDIs, a strategy designed to ensure that the institution functions before, except now we have some brown faces.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
Judy, and congratulating on the presenters for the session. Thank you very much, Judy. Something that I wanted just to say here before, giving the space for the final remarks. The every DI, but particularly anything to do with the race equality, is always overlooked, undervalued, and underpaid, if paid at all. I think that's something that we really need to think about. So in this note, I can, my gratitude to the presenters, to Professor Carla de Morrison Faria and Dr. Katucha Bento, is even more important, prominent. You are here giving your time, your energy to discuss these issues that are not easy to talk about because they always have it comes with a personal cost, particularly because of the theme. And thank you both so much for this. And if you want to leave, 1 minute take home message for our audience. Carla?
So let me see. My microphone is okay. So thank you so much for watching. I hope it was useful. And we really need, I don't think also it should be a burden of minoritized groups to sort all this mess out. It should be everybody's responsibility, and it shouldn't be only on us. So things have improved, but there's still a long way to go.
Thank you so much, Carla. Katucha?
Yes, I'm going to echo Carla and say, let's share this walk, because we are not, racism is not a black problem. So it is important to do the readings, or to do the emotional labor that we have been doing for so many centuries. And because of this labor, anyway, even with white people, with all fragilities and defenses, this is also coming from an emotional part. So recognizing this, Audre Lorde said, we need to recover the love that was stolen from us at the shores of the ocean in Africa. And this is something that we need to understand and recover for ourselves and the community that we want to build around us. So yes, let's do this together. Yeah.
Thank you so much. That's so beautiful. And thank you, my friends, for joining us, and having this time to think about other perspectives on the Black experience in Northerners. And I'm sure if the filming of the event, I recorded, as you received the alert. I'm going to make sure it's well edited, submit to Carl and Katusha, and make it available for all colleagues that unfortunately were not able to make it today, and send their apologies. Carla, Katusha, thank you so much. That it was really, really special. And I'm sure it's the beginning of a very long-standing collaboration between
For
the
sure.
University of
Yeah.
Nottingham and the two of you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Obrigada e axé.
Ashe.
That's it. Bye.
Bye
Bye-bye.
bye, everyone.
Cheers.